pleased to present Austin Faith Dialogue, brought to you by the Austin Metropolitan Ministries. In the weeks ahead, you will see these and other programs by various denominations. Austin Faith Dialogue, a public affairs program at the crossroads of religion and life, a series highlighting the cultural and social interaction between the worshiping and religious communities in and around the capital city. Austin Faith Dialogue is brought to you by the Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KTVC. Join us now in Austin Faith Dialogue.
Welcome to Austin Faith Dialogue. People of faith celebrate life. Birth, marriage, the joy of existence and sharing relationships with the people around us. But one of the questions that people of faith, like every one of us, those of us who do not walk in a faith community, must struggle with is that of death and dying. In the sacred scriptures, we read words like these: "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." Is that truly a possibility for us as we walk through that valley and that shadow? Or we hear words like this: "In the midst of life we are in death, but from whom may we receive strength?" On Austin Faith Dialogue today, I'd like for you to stay with us, because we're going to talk about celebrating life in the midst of pain and illness, terminal illness, and the support that we have in our community. I'm Carl Gronberg, host for this program of Austin Faith Dialogue, and I want for you, the viewing audience, to meet three people who are very supportive to those who experience the news of terminal illness. Peg, would you introduce yourself to our viewing audience?
Yes, I'm Peg McQuistion. I'm the Executive Director of Hospice Austin.
Good to have you here on the program.
Thank you.
Carolyn?
I'm Carolyn McDonald. I'm Volunteer Bereavement Coordinator.
And glad to have you, Carolyn, with us on the program.
Thank you.
Harold?
I'm Harold Giroux, a retired Air Force.
Good to have you, Harold, on the program. All three of you have a particular love and support for what we call hospice. And we'd like to talk with our viewing audience and let them see you and possibly create some interest in those who are viewing the program about what happens with hospice and where people they know, maybe themselves, might go for resource and strength in difficult times, so that we can learn to celebrate life even in the midst of news that is difficult. Peg, tell us about hospice and where it comes from, the concept and the history of hospice.
And 5 minutes or less,
Yeah,
2
right.
minutes or less or something. Okay, we have reason to believe that hospices existed in the 1st century following the birth of Christ, certainly by the 4th century. There were way stations for travelers where mostly the religious pilgrims could stop and be refreshed and fed, entertained, have a clean place to sleep, and then be sent on their way, on their travels. There was a nun in Dublin about 100 years ago who was building a home for terminally ill people and said, well, we will call this a hospice because it's a place for people who are on life's last journey, where they too can be refreshed, replenished, entertained, and cared for, and sent on life's last journey.
Mm-hmm.
The concept then spread to England, where it was added not only the clean bed and the food and the spiritual and emotional support, but then the concept of symptom control, that people who are in their last stages of life often suffer from very distressing symptoms, and that they can't enjoy the time left unless those symptoms are controlled. And that was Dr. Cicely Saunders, and we certainly owe her a debt of gratitude, because all hospices in the world stem from her work.
Then hospice is there to help people in difficult circumstances to learn that lesson. They're not alone. that there are people around them supporting them, and that life is celebrated until we take that last breath.
Absolutely.
I'm intrigued with the story you told about hospice being rooted there way back in history, and I wonder that story that Jesus told about the Good Samaritan, I wonder if he took him to a hospice, if that's where he went. We tell that story.
So.
You think so?
I believe so, yes.
And there they gave him support and tended to him as he was going on his way. What about volunteers? Carolyn, you say that's what you do, and how many volunteers are there, or how does a person become a volunteer in hospice?
Well, it's very simple to become a volunteer. All you need to do is to call our volunteer coordinator, Mary Stevenson, and she will send you an application. You can come in and talk with her, and she will tell you the various positions that they are. We have direct patient volunteers. We have volunteers who do work in the office. And we have bereavement volunteers who work with the families after the death of the patient, because we work with the families for at least 13 months after the death of a patient.
So the role of family is so crucial in this whole experience.
That's right.
Is that right, to have the support system of the family around? You came to Austin, you told me before we went on the air, how long ago, Carolyn?
3 years ago. But I have been with hospice in Virginia. In fact, I started a hospice in Virginia, so I've been with hospice for 10 years.
So when you came to Austin 3 years ago, that was something that you wanted to follow up on and be interested in?
It was one of the big considerations of my moving here. Was there an active hospice in Austin?
We want to come back and talk to both of you a little bit later on, but I'd like to introduce another person that has already told the viewing audience his name. Harold, you have a direct interest in this because you had a wife who experienced terminal illness. Talk to us a little bit about what you experienced through that time with your wife and how you found out about Austin Hospice.
Well, it was actually very much of a roundabout way. When the doctor finally declared her terminal, he's the one that contacted hospice. And I thought it was proper for my wife to spend her final days at home in the familiar surroundings. But what I think is amazing about hospice is that it's a shocking awakening of what is really happening. And like in my case, where my wife was just dying of starvation. She was refusing more and more food as it went along. And as I have stated before, it was almost in the final stages of it, like watching some of the Nazi camps as to how people looked there. But also what I found, looking back, kind of a Monday morning quarterbacking, that these people from hospice came in who I have never known before. They have never known us. And the caring and what they did for my wife in her days. This was a remarkable thing. And the more I think about it now, especially that all this has gone by, I find it even more amazing as to what the services that they provide.
Harold, you and your family made a decision that you wanted to have your wife at home for a final days.
Absolutely.
Is that a tendency among people? Is that something that's possible without hospice? Or is that something that people, if they'd like to make that kind of decision, they need the support of a hospice group? Peg, what do you think?
Oh, I think anyone could keep a family member at home. We like to think that we help, that we support not only the patient, but often the patient is getting everything he or she needs from the family, or essentially everything. And it's the family that needs us. And we support the family in their support of the patient.
That's a very important component to mention, that with the family giving so much of their emotional energy to the patient, to that family member who's ill, that you can be supportive then to the family members. I know that you two have read this, but I don't know if our viewing audience read this letter that Harold sent to our local newspaper, and I'd just like to read a portion of it to our viewing audience. Hospice of Austin made it possible for me to bear this burden. They provide a service that cannot be equaled by a hospital, nursing home. These people provide a service of caring that is impossible to measure in dollars. That is an important point that we want to bring out in the program, this caring, Harold, that cannot be measured with money. And this is a group that does not blow its own horn. That's why we have you here on Austin Faith Dialogue, I want you to know. We want to blow your horn and let the people know about you.
Thank you.
So I would like to do it for them. I now understand what caring for another human being is all about. Harold, did it surprise you that people you didn't know, that you did not have a long-standing relationship, could come into your home and into your life and be this supportive?
It wasn't a surprise, it was amazement.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely amazement. My wife, I felt the hospital could do nothing for her anymore. A nursing home would be also away from home. And at the going rate of dollars and cents, it's for most people, at least most people that I know, it's an impossibility.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as she was able and conscious to realize where she was at, I think this was the place. I think whether it's for my wife or for anyone else, to be at home.
Beautiful, Harold. Really appreciate you opening up your heart and telling that story to our viewing audience. Peg, what about the costs, and how does Austin Hospice, how does Austin Hospice work in terms of support?
Okay, the Medicare program reimburses us for care of the patients and their families, as does the Medicaid program, the state program. And some of the commercial insurance companies are beginning to. In addition to that, we're always out what I call groveling on the streets with our hands out, asking for donations, because some people don't have Medicare, Medicaid, or insurance. They have nothing. Or their payment source, whatever it is, doesn't cover everything. And we don't want to refuse service to anyone because they can't pay. And in fact, we don't. We never do. So we're just out asking people for money and having fundraisers and that sort of thing.
What type of patient load do you have?
Our average daily census last month, I believe, was 72. The month before that was 76. So we're staying in the 70s, in the high 70s usually.
And what type of staff do you have? And then talk about the interaction between staff and volunteers, and then Carolyn will talk with you a little bit about the volunteers. But how about staff and volunteers?
Well, I don't call it staff and volunteers. I call it paid and unpaid staff, because I think the volunteers are the staff, or part of the staff.
Good point.
So far as the paid staff is concerned, there are nurses, social workers. We have a full-time ordained minister and her half-time assistant and her full-time 40-hour-a-week volunteer that provides spiritual care. Then in addition to the nurses, social workers, and the chaplains, then we have, of course, the unpaid staff, what most people would call the volunteers. I call the volunteers the soul of hospice. I believe that the nurses and the social workers and so forth are the backbone, probably. But the real soul of hospice, I believe, are the unpaid staff, who constantly amaze me. I don't know why they do this kind of work. It is not pleasant work. Hospices have a kind of mystique, almost a kind of a glamour about them, and it isn't that way. It's very, very hard work. And I don't know why unpaid staff would come in and do that for no pay.
It's tough duty is what you're saying.
It is.
So that anybody who says, I'd really like to get involved in this, I'd like to be a volunteer, they got to realize that this is tough duty.
You're not just sitting at the patient's bedside holding his or her hand.
But they get more than they give. Because I've been a volunteer, a direct patient volunteer, and worked in bereavement, and believe me, you get much more than you give.
Well, why would people, Carolyn, why do people want to get involved in doing something like this?
Many of the people who are volunteers have had experience with terminal illness. And in fact, many of them have been their families have been hospice patients. And knowing what hospice has given to them or someone they know, they want to give something back to hospice.
It's a way of expressing their gratitude to hospice.
Right.
And do you think, like Harold has told his story, that we all sense this commonality, that the process of dying is something that we all recognize, be it vague back here, that this is something we're all going to walk through sometime, and that as you walk through that pilgrimage with people, we're able to touch our common thread of humanity that all of us have. Harold, when those people came into your home, What was the experience like for you to have these hospice volunteers come in? Now, did a nurse come in? Did a social worker come in?
Well, nurses came in. Nurses took care of her 5 days a week, and generally put in 2 hours each time. And it was also a training session for me, because what was uppermost in my mind, what can I do for my wife? How much can I do? Am I doing the right thing? Am I doing enough? And only by watching and questioning was the only way that I could have this answered. And even today, I don't know, sometimes I have doubts. Did I do enough?
That's right. Where did you take those doubts? Where did you share those doubts? With the nurse, the social worker?
With me.
This,
perhaps I'm kind of an oddball in this sort of thing, but I feel that this is a very personal thing. If there is such a thing as a soul, it's mine. She's mine.
Yes.
She doesn't go anywhere without me.
Beautiful. Carolyn, have you had experience of going into the home as a volunteer and hearing statements like Harold has made, and how do you respond to that type of, am I doing enough? Can I do more?
Well, we try to teach them anything that will help them to do more for the patient, so that they feel that they are doing everything. And education is a very vital part of what the nurses aides, and the volunteer also will help in that.
But I was wondering, Carolyn, what about training then for the volunteers? You just can't take someone in who says, I want to do this.
No.
Do they get some sort of training? Who does that training?
The training is done through Mary Stevenson with people from the community who are experts in their particular field. And we have a training class in the spring and one in the fall. In fact, one is starting in November. And we have 4 sessions for 2 weeks. So it is extensive training, and then we have on-the-job training also, because Mary is available, and it's a team concept. I don't think that we brought that out. Hospice is a team concept. The whole team works together and in support of the patient and the family. Nobody's out there by themselves. Just as the family isn't out there by themselves, the nurse isn't out there by herself. We're a team, and we work together.
A compassionate team, a caring team, a team that identifies with people's hurt and pain and their feelings of inadequacy. People who will listen, Carolyn, as
listening is one of the
individuals
most
like Harold
important things.
express those kinds of soul questions, all right?
But Harold, of course he did enough. He gave the gift of himself. What more could you have given to your wife? All of us wish we had a husband like that.
How about that? What do you do with that kind of statement, Harold? Make you feel pretty good?
Yes. Maybe another inch, I could use that height. Although it's a bit late. You can always use that. I think my motivation in doing this, what I did writing the letter and coming over here, is that I have always been a believer of giving a pat on the back for people that deserve it. I am also a believer in telling somebody when that's wrong, or I'm not getting the service in the restaurant, or this is wrong, or that's wrong. Complaining to the manager, because how does he know what is wrong, and so he can correct it unless you do this.
And your motivation for writing that letter and the motivation for coming on this program has been to give somebody a pat on the back.
But getting back to care again, I want to bring up a small point where some of us do more than the others. When you go through a door, through a supermarket or someplace where it's not an automatic door, do you hold the door for somebody behind you? Does someone hold the door for you? These are the minute things that start with caring. When someone does this, they care perhaps for a little bit more than just holding doors. Some people have that kind of capacity and some don't. And like it was said before, you get more out of this sort of thing, of being a volunteer, than what you give. I have gotten all kinds of plaques and things like that and recognition down at the air base for my volunteering for the past 13 years or so. And I keep telling all the time, I'm getting much more out of this thing than what I have given. And it's true. It is not just a matter of words. It gives me a kind of a little goal every day or every week when I go down there and I do my little bit. Not much, but whatever it is, it's something that gets done.
Harold, you know, one of the reasons that we want people like you and Carolyn and Peg on this program is because we want to say to the Austin community just what you've said so very eloquently, that there are caring people in this city, in this community, this metropolitan area where we live, and that instead of just going out looking for plaques to receive, go out and give of yourself, I think is what Peg said, and said it very well. What about this Austin Hospice, or the month of November being Hospice Month? Tell us about, what does that mean, November Hospice Month, Peg?
Well, we'll start on the federal level first, start at the top and work down. The federal Congress has declared November National Hospice Month, as they have for the last 5 years in November. And all of us will be celebrating that. This year, the governor also is signing a proclamation declaring November as Texas Hospice Month. So we have double reasons to celebrate. I'm a native Texan, and that means a lot to me for my state to be celebrating Texas Hospice Month.
Is this the first time it's happened, that this has been celebrated during the month of November?
Yes, the first time it's ever been in November, yes.
And what will you be doing to highlight this for the community?
Well, we have many events planned, fundraisers, of course. We have our open house. We've just moved into new offices in the Austin Groups for the Elderly building, and we want to show that to the community.
And you might tell the people watching the program where that's located. Where is it?
3710 Cedar Street. That's at 38th and Cedar, just east of Guadalupe by maybe a couple of blocks, from 38th Street. And our beautiful new offices that we're so proud of, and we have them because the community has supported us, and the Austin Groups for the Elderly have supported us.
And then people who want to learn more about hospice then and learn about what they can do to give of themselves will be able to come by that office and talk to people like yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Carolyn, what if a person wanted to sign up to be a volunteer? Would you be there to greet them? Would they go to the office where Peg is? Would you...
Well, I'm there a great deal of the time, but they would probably see our volunteer coordinator unless they were particularly interested in doing bereavement work, and then they would see me. They could call, make an appointment. If I'm not planning to be there, I will be there if anybody calls and says they'd like to come in and see me. I'll make it a point of being there.
We have a bereavement committee in our parish community. Now, what do you do, this bereavement committee? What is your responsibility for Austin Hospice?
We follow, as I say, the family for at least 13 months. We contact the family within 2 weeks after the death of the patient. And then again, 2 or 3 weeks after that, to do an assessment of their needs. If they need a volunteer to be assigned to them to work with you, fine. If they need counseling, I do grief counseling on an individual basis. Sometimes they just need mail. We have a memorial service every quarter for the families whose patients have died previous 2 months. We have an educational program monthly for the families of the bereaved, and we follow them with letters and whatever is necessary to facilitate their grief. As you know, you have to work through the grief process.
Exactly.
And I see our role as being facilitators of the grief process.
Peg, you mentioned dignity before we went on the air. How does that relate to hospice? Dignity and hospice. How's the connection there?
Well, I don't think that I want to give the impression that we're into some of the death with dignity phrases you hear now. We're certainly not into euthanasia. It's so foreign to what we're trying to do. We don't believe in prolonging the dying process, but we certainly don't believe in hasting it either. Dignity for us would be empowering the patient through good symptom control, through good support, and the family to make the most of whatever time is left. It may be days, it may be weeks, even months. With the patient in control as much as possible, certainly the family, if the patient can't exercise control, that the closest family members would have as much control as possible. And I'm not running down the hospitals. I worked in them myself for years, but that's not the same thing lying in a hospital bed in someone else's building as being at home with your family and everything you love around you, everything you've collected during your life.
It's not either or, it's both and.
That's true.
And it's a way of
That's
dealing
true.
with the realities of life.
That's true. We're just we're another option, but we're not right for everyone, certainly.
Peg, you might want to mention that if the family is unable to care for them at home, that we do have contracts with nursing homes and can give hospice care in the nursing homes.
Yeah, we do quite a bit of that.
I know one of the questions people are going to ask, and I have to ask this before we conclude the program. How about cost? We talked about that and funding and the community support, but does it start when they come in and talk to you about it? Should they come in with their checkbook? How does this?
No. Oh, no. That's not a real high priority for us. It probably should be. As business people, it should be, but as the kind of work we do. No, they don't come in with their checkbooks. If they have Medicare or Medicaid, well, we want to get the numbers and we'll take it from there.
I see.
If they don't, then we'll talk about, we even accept in-kind work. If someone has some particular talent and can't pay, and they want to pay us that way, that's fine. Or certainly we have many people who can pay nothing.
You really are a person-centered service to our community. Carolyn, before we conclude the program, is there any invitation you'd like to express to folks on who might be interested in participating in Austin Hospice?
I would like to invite them to get in touch with us. There is a great joy in doing this work, and there is some type of work for everyone, and we will find the right job for them.
You have underlined that a number of times in this program, the joy of giving. Harold, as we close off the program, is there anything you'd like to say to people about the advantage of knowing hospice?
I would say that if there was a Nobel Prize given for care, I think hospice would win it hands down.
Boy, thank you. Peg, you hear what he said?
I heard him.
Nobel Prize for Care, hospice would win.
I heard him.
Would you
He's
like to
great,
say
isn't he?
something in response to that as we conclude the program?
I would say I think he's beautiful.
Yeah, he is beautiful.
He really
And the
is.
three of you are beautiful, and we thank you for coming to Austin Faith Dialogue. And once again, telling all of us in the community viewing this program that this is a wonderful place to live and to experience all that God offers to each and every one of us. Continue to celebrate your living and your dying. Thanks for watching Austin Faith Dialogue.